Welcome everyone to Forthright Solution Spotlight series. I'm Kristen from Forthright, and we are thankful for your time today. Every month we showcase a different solution from our trusted technology partners that solves a challenge or a problem we're seeing in the industry. This month we're featuring LOGINVSI. Without further ado, let's get this party started. I'd like to introduce today's headliners. We have Matt McKinnon from Forthright and Blair Parkhill from LOGINVSI. We're going to share some great information with us today. All right, so Matt is going to share with us a little bit of information about Forthright before we dive into LOGINVSI.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Thank you very much. So I see a lot of familiar as well as some new names. So thanks again for everyone for attending. My name is Matt McKinnon. I'm the Enterprise Sales Manager here at Forthright Technology Partners. Just a brief overview on what we do at Forthright and what we're all about. We are an IT consulting firm with a focus on the end user experience for all your users. So for us, it's more than just selling you products and tools to make things better. But one of the big differentiators with us is we really put ourselves in your shoes with the ultimate goal of really improving the end user experience, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. So I mentioned end user experience, and so what does that really mean? It's really learning about not just what your users do, but what do they need to get their job done each and every day, and try to ignore the clutter, right? The less technology they have to kind of memorize or understand, the better. The end users, they don't care what kind of solutions you have. They just want to get their work done. And that, when we go about our practice, that's really a big focus of ours. And, I mentioned it's not about selling you guys stuff. You think about it, you can have the best VDI platform, you can have the fastest storage, but that doesn't guarantee optimal end user experience. I see a lot of experts in the end user computing space, a lot of infrastructure people out there. I don't have to tell you that it's a lot more than that. And that's really where the Forthright secret sauce really comes in my opinion. Kristen, hit the next slide. Thank you. So there are various ways how our customers like to leverage our services at Forthright and how we could potentially be of service to you. Whether you need advisory, whether it's like a health check on your environment, maybe you like some assistance with a design of a new VDI platform or a network design. Perhaps you're trying to onboard new users from M&A and you have a hard deadline to meet, perhaps, we can help you there. And then we have various support packages that we provide, whether it's like a incident support ticket pack, we can call our support team, to anything all the way up to managed services of your environment, or perhaps a portion of your environment that maybe your team doesn't have the full skill set as of yet. You can hit the next slide, Kristen. Thank you. So I mentioned end user experience, certainly a focus for us at Forthright. I think that's a big differentiator where we really separate ourselves in the industry. At the end of the day, it's really all about providing your users a very optimal end user experience that's secure. I keep harping on end user experience, and one of the tools that we like to leverage is LOGINVSI. I'm sure many of you have used their load testing tool in the past. They do a lot more than load testing, and Blair's going to kind of elaborate on that. but one of the partners we love to leverage, and hopefully you have a little better understanding of what we do at Forthright. And feel free to reach out, whether you have a design question, you have perhaps a unique use case you have in mind, question about a new technology or a new release. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to set up a complimentary call with one of our architects, and just have a technology conversation with you. So thank you. So with that, I guess we'll pass it off to Blair.
Yes.
Thanks, Matt. I feel real privileged right now because it looks like we've got quite a nice attendance today. So that makes me super excited. So thank you all for joining. I think, yeah, it looks like we can see the screen okay. So my name's Blair. I really take remote working seriously, but also I will admit that I'm the first to take full advantage of remote working. In this case, I typically work from Costa Rica, or you might catch me working from Costa Rica, but today is a little different. I'm in Colorado. I get the best experience that I can out of both places, and while in Colorado, not only do I get to be productive with my end user workspace, but also the views are quite amazing. So remote working is here to stay, and I intend to make it the best that I can with anything that I come up with, and when I work with the company. Everything that we do is about getting a great experience no matter where you are. So with that said, we do have, quite a few customers that use our products to characterize the performance and kind of the end user experience of a number of workspace solutions on the market today. In fact, you'll see our name kind of intertwined with just about every workspace, solution on the market today. But as we work with our customers very closely, which include Fortune 50, Fortune 500, very large retail enterprises, lots of healthcare, government, finance, typically we'll get these types of questions. And, the larger the enterprise is, the deeper these can get. But it usually comes in three varieties. The first is, how many sessions can I get on this pool that I've built? I've created this wonderful resource for all of my users to log into and utilize, but how many users can I get on that reliably, and up to how many can I get that will deliver a good experience on that? So that's typically the first, and that's where our name has really come from. We've been working very closely with Citrix, Microsoft, and VMware to help even them determine this on their systems and their solutions. So as vendors, we have quite a few customers that use these questions and get answers with our products. But you kind of take it beyond there, as Matt had alluded to, with our current generation of products, and it really becomes more about, how is that experience today, even in production? Can I get a good degree of certainty, with a good degree of certainty, a measurement of how well the end user experience is for my remote users? And then also, there's no doubt a lot of changes happening in our technology stack today for these digital workspaces. You can change something like a Windows 10 operating system or update that on the images that you manage. And you can see, just a huge number of performance differences that can come along with that, not to mention storage capacity, memory utilization, all that stuff. So I have a lot of people asking me, will this latest image update support the applications that I have at the scale that I have? And then also, will those updates break any of the line of business applications that I'm using today? So these are the typical conversations that we base our customer interactions around. So I'm going to kind of walk you through, how do we find those answers for you? So today, this is what the technology stack looks like for an end user compute solution. Now, we're not going to walk through each layer of this cake, but it's very deep. And if you imagine, each one of these layers is going to go through a periodic change throughout, a day, a month, a year. And even several years. So each one of these, one change can kind of disrupt anything else in the stack. So it's really good to make sure that you're testing these changes as you go through. Now, if you're using the cloud compute solutions for DAS, there are a number of these things that can change with that, especially if you're working from home. All of these things kind of now are much more open to changes as we use public networks and cloud desktop brokering systems, things like that. So again, lots of changes. In fact, last year, we counted the number of changes Microsoft made in their service branches for Windows 2010, and it was over 1,200 changes. We expect this to pretty much double each year from last year through this year and next year. So you can imagine staying on top of those could be quite challenging, not only in your non-production workloads, but in your production workloads, some of these things can change. So it's upon us to try and figure out what those changes, what the impact of those changes are going to be. And at LOGINVSI, we're really focused on driving this adoption of what we call shift left testing, right? We do a lot of work up front. That work is typically limited by the amount of time that we have to get it done. And then we'll push a lot of those changes into production. Now, one of the things that you'll notice about this model is that the further you can shift that work left, the less costly it is going to be if you find a defect in there. Obviously, if you find a defect in pre-production, you're not only taking on the effect of having an issue in your pre-production environment that you have to fix, but you're not impacting production users. And as soon as you start impacting production users, that's when the cost of that defect increases dramatically. So we're all about pushing as much of that work to the left. And you might be asking, well, in a production environment, I actually have real users that will push against the system and they'll, will discover some issues that we maybe couldn't find in a pre-production environment. So that's what we're all about. We're all about being able to push a lot of that to the left by using virtual users as opposed to real users. And I'll dive into that a little deeper here in a bit. But you can see from a pre-production versus production perspective, in pre-production, we're looking at things like smoke testing applications to make sure that they work, sanity testing to make sure they work in a certain condition, and then acceptance testing, making sure that that application responds to user interactions in an acceptable way. And as we push closer to production, you start looking at quality assurance and then performance to make sure that the workspaces and the applications are doing everything that you want them to do before you push that into production. And then after production, continuously testing that environment at a much smaller scale helps to really drive back a lot of feedback that can also help you to get on top of any issues that you find before your real users discover those. So let's walk through a test strategy as we see it. Now, this test strategy really kind of suits whether it's using our product or not, but we've kind of designed the product to work in this type of method, right? Where you're going to be testing application compatibility. Maybe I've upgraded my Windows OS and I have a number of line of business applications that I have to test against that change. Now, obviously, the larger the enterprise customers that we have, the more applications they have to test with every change. We have one customer that does tens of thousands of application tests against new image test. This is a very large global distributor, and you can imagine how difficult that would be. They actually have to outsource a lot of that testing. But even if you have 100 apps or even 1,000, testing those applications very quickly against a change can be very, very onerous and almost impossible. So typically what our customers will do is they'll say, well, forget these 80 business applications. Let's just focus on this 20% and make sure those are okay. And then you're starting to make trade-offs in the quality of your end user experience. So that's what application testing is about, is making sure those applications are going to be compatible and well fit for any changes that you make underneath them. Then what we do is we move towards a single host performance testing. So we have a hypervisor, we're going to put a certain number of users on that hypervisor, and we want to make sure that that number of users can be supported by the capabilities of that hypervisor. So that's what we call a single host performance test. How many sessions do we expect to get on that host? Let's test it and see how it behaves, not only before we make the change, but after we make some changes too. Gives us an opportunity to compare. Again, if a Windows 10 update changed the performance profile of this system, wouldn't you like to know that you can get either fewer or more users on that system after that change before you push that into production? And then in user acceptance testing, we're looking at being a lot more, interactive when it comes to applications that we're testing on the workspace. We want to be interactive in a way that your real users are going to be. And so whether it's a web app or a Win32-based local application, we have a number of tools in place where we can actually walk through that application, similar to how a real user would, and we can provide you reports on what that behavior was like as a virtual user went through that application. And then lastly, performance testing at scale. Nothing really works the same as you start to scale it up and multiply it, because then you start to discover other bottlenecks. So that's basically our test strategy for pre-production. And then lastly, we have this thing called continuous testing. In this case, you just arm a few of these virtual users to log in from a remote location potentially, and just use the experience and provide some feedback. Now, I did this in a WVD environment over a weekend. You could see Friday, I started off with a pretty good performance for my login times, around 50 seconds. And I was noticing that over the weekend that continued to kind of increase by about 10 seconds. This could be due to a number of factors, but the one real surprising thing was that Monday morning, as soon as the East US2 data center was in a full rush, that was about 6 a.m. my time here Mountain, 8 a.m. East time, you could see that the utilization of the Azure data center in this region caused some latency spikes. And if you have a cloud-based or even a utilized infrastructure that gets heavily utilized at a point during the day, it's nice to be able to determine, is that utilization going to impact things like login times? Because on the one hand, it may be okay that they spike up a little bit, but you're going to have users that are going to call in and say, hey, I can't get into my desktop, or it's taking too long. At least you have something that you can attribute that to. Or if you want to fix it, ahead of time, as soon as you start seeing those logins really start to drive up, then you have an opportunity to do some things, maybe some changes in networking or protocol connections, things of that nature. So it really helps give this full suite of testing that gives you data points about all of the changes you're making before they impact your real users. Now, how do we do this? We have this concept of virtual users, and you can see down below the depictions of our virtual users working in health care, medical data, ERP, or I'm sorry, what do they call it? The kind of a healthcare profile and records, electronic health records. And then in another, you're looking at an MRI, and then even in another, you're looking at just using Microsoft Office products, right? Virtual users are intended to, again, interact with these applications very similar to how real users do, so that we can get feedback from the system without tasking real people to do that work. Now, the virtual user, we can simulate human behavior via software. We can simulate daily behavior via workflows, which I'll demonstrate for you and show you. And then how each of these interactions feel by timing certain events, like opening a file, or creating a spreadsheet, or typing in values in a database, right? We can time all of those events, which really gives you a granular feel for what the feedback on each of those looks like. Now, the virtual users are easy to deploy. They do deploy, as I've mentioned, much more than a login, right? It's not just logging in and seeing how long it takes to log into this workspace, but it also interacts with the applications. And we also have a number of applications that are built into Login Enterprise, so that you don't have to create a lot of yours from scratch, and we're already using the most common productivity applications that you can simulate and use as well, without having to dive into kind of scripting your own application interactions. Now, if you do have your own applications, your line of business applications, or your homegrown or cloud applications, whatever, we can test everything together, but we can give you the opportunity to do customized workloads. So if you use Epic, for example, in a healthcare type of scenario, we already have Epic templates that you can use, or if you're using your own line of business, again, it's very easy for us to teach you, and to also have you create your own custom scripts for your own custom apps. So that's the value of virtual users. Now, when we look at them in pre-production testing, as I've mentioned, you can test application compatibility. Do they still run? Do they perform the same with a new release of Windows 10? And what are the differences between those two? Because you can compare before and after. And the way that we could do this is, again, with our Login Enterprise solution. I'll show you that here on the next slide. Testing load at scale, as we've also discussed, how many sessions can I get on a host before performance really starts to degrade? And as we've seen, in a lot of the activity that we've had with enterprises over the last year and a half. We've been just deluged with the number of questions and people looking for answers about how well cloud systems work. When you're going from on-prem to off-prem, when you're starting to adopt more of cloud scenarios, you might wonder, well, compared to my bare metal hypervisor that I have in my own data center, how do these instances in the cloud really work? Can they support my workforce? And do I need the same number or more machines to be able to make that happen? The architecture is super simple. The virtual appliance is something you deploy. When it deploys, you create some launchers. Launchers are basically like you and me in front of a computer, establishing sessions to our VMware, Citrix, Microsoft, Nutanix, whatever types of solutions, where you connect to that connection server and then connect to that backend target system. So it's a very straightforward and simple architecture. When you put it all together and you start to look at things like scalability, you can push a number of these launchers out there. They can handle up to 30 sessions each, and you just start adding these together, and you can really drive the system to see how it performs, where those bottlenecks are going to be. And believe it or not, being able to test optimizations on these Windows 10 images can actually get you a lower cost of the solution, more users per server, because it's giving you an opportunity to test the changes that you're making from a performance perspective. So really valuable stuff. Now again, the production testing scenario with continuous testing. Think about it in a way kind of like Internet of Things. When you have sensors in your house, when the house gets too warm, you're notified about it. If the door has been opened, you're notified about it. So this in effect works very similarly. You know, if the performance changes throughout the day, for example, it takes longer to log in at 8 a.m., you can set a threshold and you can actually get a notification that says, hey, it's taking longer than 40 seconds for the virtual user to log in. You might want to check that out before real users start to feel that. Is this a regional issue or is this a global issue? If you're logging in from many different states in the US, for example, to a single data center, states farther away may take longer to log in. Or you have an ISP in a certain region that may be causing slow connections. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to identify those before you really start to deep dive? This really helps with a fast time to resolution. And then unavailability certainly impacts productivity in a big way. In this case, it's mere seconds before the virtual user will tell you, hey, I couldn't connect to this workspace. Here's your notification. You may want to check it out. So you could effectively get 5-10 minutes jump on resolving that issue before real users again start opening support tickets and things really start to get crazy for your support teams. How does this production testing work? Again, it all starts with the Login Enterprise Virtual Appliance. What it does is it will reach out to all of the launchers that you have worldwide, and it will say, hey, launchers, I want you to start a session and connect to that desktop pool or application pool that's servicing you. And then once you connect, I want you to start using the desktop and the applications. And I want you to report that experience back to Login Enterprise so that you can start to see in reports and things like that what that is like. And again, with notifications, if things start to slow down, then your operations team can be notified immediately. So from a production experience, again, fast time to resolution and being able to jump on a problem before real users can feel that can be a real time and cost saver. So let's, I figured instead of taking you through a bunch of PowerPoints, why don't we just take you through two different concepts. Number one is workflows. So how do we simulate human behavior? And the other is reporting. What does it look like when we do that on the system and what kind of reports do they give you? And I'll try not to make this too nerdy or too deep so that it can make sense to all of you. So let's first take a look at workflows. Again, workflows are considered by us to be that behavior that a real user is going to conduct on a workspace with the applications. So let's just take a quick look at the applications. I have a number of applications in my pool of applications right here. You can see I'm using Microsoft 365 applications, the former Office 365. And I'm also using applications like Edge, the Edge browser, but we support Chrome and so many different apps. So this is my pool of applications. And with each one of these applications, For example, Outlook. I have an opportunity to say, log into Outlook. I want you to browse your inbox. I want you to open an email message and read it. I want you to close the message. I want you to compose a message. After you compose it, I want you to save the draft, close that message. Then I want to review my calendar. And then I want to exit Outlook, and then I want to move on to my next task. So basically, each one of these gives you the ability to make your virtual user do that. And any of the ones that say interaction are application scripts that we provide you already that will do that. You don't have to do any scripting or anything like that. Now, to create a type of user workflow, I have a knowledge worker down here. So we have this concept of application groups where you can take any one of the applications from this pool and put it into a group. And as you might imagine, once I start to group these applications, it starts to really resemble what a user persona starts to look like, right? If you have a task worker that might just open up Excel and enter a bunch of data, do some calculations, and then send that back, then you can do that. If you have somebody that uses the entire Office suite, like I might throughout the course of the day, then that is what constitutes more of a knowledge worker. And in our case, the knowledge worker opens Edge maybe to surf the web, checks their email, starts to run some reports, writes some information in Word, saves that file, and then moves on to PowerPoint to create a presentation. So this is what I consider kind of a knowledge worker. Now, the cool thing about enterprise businesses is that this might represent a core of your production community, but each of them may have a few more applications in their workspace that they're going to be using. So it's very easy to add, another application to this. For example, calculator, you can always add that because that might be something that user uses, or a line of business application, whatever you'd like. So that's what constitutes this idea of a knowledge worker or an application group. And so that is what constitutes my workflow. Now, I've kind of broken that up a little bit, and here I'll just open up one of these tests. These different tests are very similar, whether it's a continuous test, a load test, or an application test. So why don't we just kind of dive into one of them and take a look what it looks like. And the point here is, again, to show you how do we set up this workflow. Number one, the virtual user is being asked to connect to a server or a desktop pool. Once it connects to that desktop pool, then it's going to do a number of actions once it's established that session. And here are those actions that we're talking about. And you can see they run in a certain order. You're certainly welcome to rearrange that order in the way that you feel best represents your users. You can enable and disable these actions, again, to best represent what that real user looks like. And then the other thing that we have the opportunity to do is set up these thresholds or alerts. So I can set up a threshold, for example, for let's just say PowerPoint. And I want to see if I am worried about storage, for example, one of the things that I might want to do is open a PowerPoint file or save it. Opening it would be a read from storage, saving it would be a write from storage. So saving, I want to make sure that happens in less than, let's just say, 3 seconds. So as soon as I add that notification, if it takes that user any longer than that time, then you get notifications. So now you're combining this idea of a virtual user logging into a system, telling you about what that experience was like, and then after they've logged on, they're going to use a number of applications, and again, they're going to tell you what that user experience was like. And you can create all sorts of thresholds that will give you a warning as soon as it crosses any one of those levels. So that's what a workflow is really quickly. Again, I didn't want to dive too deeply into this, and we can certainly do that one-on-one if you would love to do that. But that's this concept of workflows, kind of designing a test. Now, what kind of information do we get from that kind of test? And that's really where that starts to drive things like business decisions, and also the improvement of your infrastructure as these changes roll in before they get to production. So the first one would be an application test. Again, this is something that would potentially test a change in the image, whether it's an application change or an operating system change. You can see that I have some comments here. I've been updating some of my application scripts to see how successful they are at working. And I'm going to open a report very easily by just clicking on that. It generates a PDF report for me. And I can browse through this report to see, what was the success of this test. I can see that none of my applications failed after that update. I can see that application performance slowed down a little bit. It's basically alerting me to the fact that, hey, you might want to check out what that was. And if you look at things like login performance and latency for that user experience, these are things that you can compare from one test to the other. And this PDF report is intended to kind of use to work with your desktop development team who are in charge of kind of designing this great end user experience. So if we take that one step further and look at, okay, Outlook for some reason, it succeeded at running, but from a performance perspective, it did not run as fast as we expected. So why don't we just jump into that report and see. Now what we can see here is the application start time had a threshold of 2 seconds. I usually give Outlook 2 seconds for it just to be able to start. And you can see that while I expected 2 seconds, it almost doubled that in terms of the actual time it took to start the application. That could have been because of a profile change in the Windows operating system, or perhaps Outlook changed during a Microsoft Office update, where it takes longer to render a profile as it starts up. Right? These are things that you don't want to have as a surprise, right? Because that, again, impacts your production workforce and could generate a more costly operations kind of environment. So that's what that looks like. And with other applications, you also get more things like more of a user acceptance test, right? How long does it take to start an application? How long does it take to open the open window, which combs through all of the drives that are being connected during that user session? How long does it take to open the document itself and save the file? So these are examples of different interactions with the application, and you can see how they're reporting over time. So that's the idea of an application test. And you can imagine that after making a change, you want to test that really quick. You look at a report and you say, oh, wow, look, Outlook actually had an issue starting up its profile in time. I could do a quick Google search for that symptom of that update, which can either be optimized or corrected, or I could say, you know what, we're going to have to live with this. So you may have an opportunity to inform your users or change some SLAs or change some thresholds as you're kind of watching that environment. So this really gives you the first opportunity to optimize and to really make sure those applications work well. So that's the application tests. The next ones are the load tests, and load tests are designed to be able to test things at scale. So, let's just take a look at one really quick. So here I'm looking at the number of active sessions over time. I'm testing a 32 core instance in Azure for this test. And what I'm doing is I'm logging on 64 sessions, so 2 sessions per core, over a period of 32 minutes, right? So that every 30 seconds, I'm firing off a new session to really start to load up that system very quickly, because I want to see how that behaves during a login storm. Well, let's just take a look at logins. And as you look at the system, you can see, well, as we get to about 37 sessions, that's just over 1 session per vCPU, I start to notice some more erratic behavior when it comes to latency and performance. So here's where I can make a decision. Either I can live with 80-second logons, which aren't going to be very good for some of my end users, or I can say, maybe I just want to cap the server to 1 session per vCPU or 32 sessions. Now, these are concurrent sessions. So if your user behavior operates at 80% concurrency or 50% concurrency, obviously you can really use this to drive the perfect sizing for that system. And you can see from a login performance perspective, how that may impact the system. Here, again, with WVD, I am using a reverse connection protocol, which gets to be very busy as the network starts to really become under load and as the session hosts become under load. So that's one finding that you may appreciate as you're doing some of your load testing. Now we have another one, for example. Let me just take a look at how Excel behaves as the system really starts to ramp up that load. And here we can see that at about 42 sessions or 41, just over that 42 session count, I can start to see that things start to become erratic again. Especially here, when you start to look at opening the Excel document, this is going to be a storage read. So I can see that the request for a storage read is really starting to get laggy at a certain point on this 32 core system. It could be because of the storage that's underlying. It could be a number of reasons. I also see that starting the application starts to lag at a certain number. So all of this information really helps you to drive, optimizations and the best user experience to the right scale. The other cool part about this is if you wanted to run this test after making some optimization changes, then you can certainly do that as well. For example, I tested a system where I wanted to test, let's see, 180 sessions on 2 session hosts, and I didn't really make any changes, but I wanted to see if, if I ran this twice, would it perform the same way? Well, I could see from a login perspective, everything just about logged in the same way. If I look at how application starts happened, I can see that for both runs, that worked about the same way. If I look at logons, I can look at all this logon data, and I can see here that it, again, started to behave the same way with a total login time really starting to show a little bit of a discrepancy between these 2 sessions. But for the most part, they behave equally. Now, what if I changed the session host and did this? There's a good chance that I would see something like, or if I optimize, that after optimizing, that one of these curves would have been dramatically different, meaning that it would have been lower after optimizations, and I could see that very clearly between those 2 tests. So that's load testing results. And then lastly, the one that's a little more fun is the continuous test. This is, again, this Internet of Things type of sensor that you can place in remote locations to find out if the user experience in those locations is on par. So what I'm doing right now is I'm running a continuous test, and that test is running 2 sessions from each of these launcher machines. If we looked at that visually, this is what it looks like. I have 4 launcher machines. It is running 1 session every 10 minutes. So you can see that, some of these will start and then others will roll off. If you look at it real quick, it looks something like this, where that virtual user is, again, constructing an email and typing in that email like it was going to be sent to a number of peers, right? So what it's doing is it's doing this from those remote locations at a certain interval, 24/7/365, so that we can get some data about that experience, not just from one user, but from many. So how does that look? We can take a look at it here. I'm going to click on that test, and I can see that from an application performance perspective, everything is performing just fine. But I am seeing some applications that aren't running like I would expect them to. Everything else from login performance through latency is also looking pretty good. But if I look at PowerPoint, for example, I can see that user number 96 logged in as session host number 3 and through launcher number 2, and it encountered an issue where the script could not process successfully due to the application not starting. And we can see that it's because the user has not been activated with Office, and it's asking them to sign in. Now, this I could put some automation in place to get past this, but what we're looking at here is PowerPoint's getting too busy to be able to get past this the sign-in event, and that's something I can go and fix before I push this into production again, right? So there's a lot of things that I can find when I start testing at scale, and I can get a lot of insights about what is the problem with that, just by simply looking at a picture of, what that problem is. Again, I'm getting a pop-up here that I don't want to have for my production users, so I can use a GPO or something to get that out of the way. A couple other things that we might want to look at, if you want to look at how things perform over time, you can certainly take a look at that. You can look at it over a longer time interval to see if there are any trends, for example. Looks like PowerPoint's doing pretty good here from a performance perspective. If we go back 15 minutes, we could look at login performance. Again, something we can look at over a period of time. And we're under our threshold of 60 seconds for total login time, so that's a good thing. I can lastly look at latency. So this is round trip protocol latency. And this is going to change depending on where these launchers are located. You might see higher latencies, for example, in areas that are farther away from the data center. So what might that look like? We do have this map view that shows you, what does it look like, when I have everything running. And I can see here from an operations perspective, let's just pretend that here in Colorado is where my data center is located, but I am seeing anomalies at different data centers from around the United States. So I can click on those, and I can dive in and see, well, what is that issue? Is it a latency issue, or is it an application issue? And here it's that same Outlook application issue that each one of these sites are seeing. So, it really gives you a very clear view of what things look like so you can jump on them. So depending on what your remote workforce looks like, if it's small office or if it's home users in a certain region, again, this is the kind of information that you are able to kind of use at your discretion to make sure that the end user experience stays good, and gives you an opportunity, again, ahead of time to kind of correct that course. So that's really the dashboard and really what the reporting of the system looks like. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can go about getting that information. For example, everything is available through a public API. So if you use APIs to kind of populate your dashboards, or if you pull reports via API, we certainly can do that. We have the opportunity to turn on email alerting, or if you want to use your event viewer in Windows, you can certainly do that as well. So lots of different ways to set up notifications and be informed about any changes or notifications that happen throughout the course of your testing. So that's at a high level how all of this stuff works. Again, the intention was just to give you a higher level overview. Again, and we would also be very happy to dive in a little deeper if you have further questions. So that's just the quick demo on the product. Now, I'm going to go back to my slide deck, and we're going to skip through here and look at just, well, if I was interested, how would I get started? And what I can tell you is it takes less than an hour to get started with doing your own testing. And it's pretty easy to do. You just download the virtual appliance and import that into your hypervisor. That appliance is already pre-built and ready to be imported or installed in that hypervisor environment, whether that's on-prem with VMware or Citrix, or if it's in the cloud on Azure. We've got those virtual appliances already built for you. Starting up and initializing it is just really powering it on, answering a few questions, and letting it initialize itself. Again, only takes about 10 minutes, a few minutes. From there, we create some virtual users that we want to be able to test with. We create a launcher machine and install that launcher software. That takes about 10 minutes. And then creating your first test only takes about 5 minutes. Again, we already have applications pre-built in the product for you. Once you have your launcher selected, then it's just picking a particular launcher for that test, and then adding that application to the test and firing off your first test. So overall, it takes about less than an hour to do that. And after you run that test, you're basically just looking at watching as that test proceeds, and then kind of looking at a report. So that's basically it. Pretty simple, easy to use. And we here at LOGINVSI are always here, ready and willing to help you if you do want to try this out for yourself. Anybody that's running a trial has access to our support team to help you get through any issues that you might be encountering, so that you can have a good experience with that trial today. So before I hand it back to our Forthright team, if you are looking at testing something like WVD, we do have a test kit available. We do have an application recorder called Application X-Ray. So it helps to turn your application interactions into code. So you have a user interface to be able to help you do that. And then again, I explain this concept of application groups that helps to really build a persona for your real user workforce. So if you wanted to do that, you could just go to loginvsi.com, click request free trial or your free trial, and we'll get you started with that process. So that's it. I really feel privileged to be able to be presenting to you today. Again, I would love to dive in a little deeper if you are interested. I'd be happy to do a one-on-one demo if you'd like. But that's basically the high level on us here at LOGINVSI, and also this new methodology of shift left testing, made popular by organizations such as Gartner. In the way that enterprises are really starting to drive, their practices more towards non-production before they release. And last note too, if you're an iGel customer, we do have integration built into iGel already, so you don't even have to build your own launchers. iGel can do that for you. So that's the end of my my pitch. I'll hand it back to Kristen and Matt. Now, if there are any questions, I think now would probably be a good time to do that, huh, guys?
Yeah, thank you, Blair. Kristen, any questions from the audience thus far? So Blair, I do have a question actually. One of our customers actually emailed me. So this came from a systems engineer. I would label him, he's kind of like the end user computing lead. So he manages a Citrix environment, and he just emailed me, Matt, how could we leverage LOGINVSI with our existing monitoring tool? So if you already have, say, like a liquidware stratosphere or a control up, or there are others, what would your answer be? How could they best leverage LOGINVSI?
Yeah, they're actually very complementary with each other. So you saw this idea of pre-production, and typically these monitoring tools will focus mostly on a production type of environment, right? They're there for similar reasons. They want to alert you if something's going on so that you can address that, get it fixed very quickly. But imagine if you took the power of those tools and you use them with some of our pre-production testing, like our scale testing. If you could actually use something like Liquidware to look at your ESX hosts during the course of a test and to look at all of the resources in VMware during the course of that pre-production test, you start to get insights about this environment before you even turn on the production button, right? So you get insights from Liquidware while Login Enterprise is causing stress or driving the system to behave like a production one, right? So that's one way that you can kind of use those two together. Now, from a production perspective, where monitoring tools are really very well built and very purposeful, the way that we can, join hands with them is by leveraging the ability to have these virtual users out there. So once you start to have these virtual users, there's a couple of things that you get that you don't get from real users. Number one, a virtual user runs 24/7 by 365. And when you look at that through Liquidware, then you start to get some analytics about what's going on even when people aren't at the office, right, or aren't working. And the other way that that could be helpful is that you get a very consistent behavior from the virtual users. So while your real users may be prone to do some different things, like open up too many tabs one day or watch a video while they're trying to do something else, that can affect the way that the performance is on their experience, right? But these virtual users of ours behave very similarly. So if you track those with your monitoring tools, then the insights you get about them are very consistent. And typically, again, you get that fast time to resolution because of this consistency. You know where to target your focus to resolve any issues. So very complementary with each other. In fact, we have working relationships with many of the monitoring vendors out there today.
Gotcha, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen, any other questions from the audience? And
Hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I think I was having some microphone issues. We did have a question about asking about licensing and how that works.
Okay. Yep. Typically, our product is licensed depending on the number of seats that you have licensed via Citrix, Microsoft, or VMware, for example. So, we'll basically license by the number of seats that you have, and that licensing is subscription based. So you could do it annually, you could do it 3 years, but that's basically what it comes down to. It's based upon the desktop pool that you have licensed and the subscription that you'd like. So that's something that our sales folks can do very quickly for you to give you a quick idea about what the solution looks like for you.
Okay, great.
Great questions.
Yeah, I think that's about it for questions. We did have some people that said thank you for the content, that they appreciated it. So some good feedback from there.
Yeah, great presentation, Blair. I mean, hopefully everybody now realizes you guys are just much more than just a load testing tool, but truly a solution that can really not just guarantee great end user experience, but it's a big time saver too that teams can take advantage.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, I think that wraps it up for today. We'll just end a few minutes early, give everyone a couple minutes before they have to run off to their next obligation. Just wanted to say thank you to Blair and Matt, especially Blair, for all that great content. And again, if you have any questions, please email us at either success or marketing@forthright.com. Either one, we should be able to get those to the right person. But we will be following up with you in the next few days. And on behalf of the Forthright team and our featured sponsor, LOGINVSI, I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon and have a great day, everybody.